So I'm going to call this part 2 to the reply for walking for 10 hours in New York City as a woman. I think this is worth a part 2 because I've seen some interviews and videos that are worth discussing a little bit. Apologies if it's slightly sore throat at the moment, so I'm not going to speak too loudly, but basically in the first video on CNN it was a debate between the author I think his name's Steve Santagati, and a woman who is defending Hollaback and the female moderator. And he was basically saying Hollaback is pathetic, and he made some fair points. He also said some things that I didn't entirely agree with, but basically what he was saying was that women have this complex whereby if the guys were hot, she wouldn't have a problem with it because it would boost her self-esteem. And I have seen that mentioned a number of times on other videos. So some guys think this is a dimension, a complex that some women have about whether the guy is hot or not. In other words, if he's a good-looking man, it would boost her self-esteem and she wouldn't have a problem with it. But the guys in the video were supposedly average or ugly. There's also been an element of the fact that they were overwhelmingly African American. Hollaback has defended that and said that was an unintended consequence. I agree with Mr. Sangati. Sorry, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, but I agree with him insofar as Hollaback is pathetic, in the sense that, although maybe I disagree for a different reason, I disagree because it is pathetic to have 10 hours of supposed footage and edit it down to a few minutes and then vilify all male New Yorkers, which is indirectly what it's doing. That is indirectly what it's doing because it is insinuating that all New Yorkers are one and the same. Although the debate itself was neutral, the headline for it certainly was not. The headline was "Author defends catcalling a viral video." Well, the problem I take with that is it automatically insinuates that every piece of communication in that now famous video was catcalling. I've already made the point that some of it is open to debate. I mean, I worked for a while as a charity fundraiser, and one of the things we had to do was approach strangers on the street and talk to them with gestures like "Hello, how are you?" Men and women. So I do have a concern about this video that we are only seeing one side. We're seeing it from her perspective as the victim, but we don't know the full story about all of the people communicating with her. Incidentally, another video I've just watched, which is interesting, and I'll put a link to this, is a guy who decided to do an experiment, walk through the streets of New York for 3 hours. In that video, guess what? He had 30 pieces of communication. So if you work out, that was 3 hours, she had 10 hours, he got spoken to 30 times, she got spoken to 100 times, so it's roughly the same proportion. The people who gestured to him were both male and female. I don't know if some of the guys were gay, but the fact of the matter is, he did have gestures from some women as well. Now, the idea being, he was a good looking man, he was well toned, wasn't a bodybuilder, but he's well toned. And some women in the video were saying exactly the same thing. "Damn, oh, you're hot. My friend thinks you're really attractive," things like that. So is this harassment? Some of the guys were saying things like, "Oh, hello, big man," and stuff, whether they were being aggro or I don't know. But the idea that men never get any sort of verbals on the street is a lot of rubbish. There may be less from a sexual perspective. In fact, I would argue that men probably get a hell of a lot more harassment in terms of, maybe not from a sexual perspective, but in terms of other guys just being jackasses, basically. In the UK, we have a big problem with drunks and yobs who would just comment at anyone walking past, and certainly some of these people would challenge another man to a fight for no other reason than there being a drunk moron. And certainly men can be in a situation where they have to deal with that sort of idiot. Say if a guy's with his girlfriend, more often than not, he would have to deal with another man trying to be an asshole, basically. So there are things that are not being spoken about that men also have to deal with. I would agree that men probably, the sexual harassment is probably a lot less for men. I would agree with that. And at this point, I want to make it very clear that I don't agree with those who say there's absolutely no problem with this. In fact, as a matter of fact, a close friend of mine, I'm not going to violate her privacy, but a close friend of mine has recently told me that she was actually a victim of sexual harassment. Her boss followed her home. Now, that person happens to be a close friend of mine, and if it made her uncomfortable, I would take issue with that boss. So I don't agree with those who say there's no problem whatsoever with some of the things that were being said in the video. If a woman's uncomfortable, you shouldn't do it. Simple as that. However, there's three things I fundamentally take issue with. Number one, as this author rightly pointed out, Hollaback is an ad agency. They want attention. So, in that sense, this is a stunt. And he pointed out a lot of these guys may well have been planted. Now, the woman who was disagreeing with him, I don't know if she's a feminist or not, but she said, so what if they're planted? Well, actually, that is significant, because it would demonstrate distortion. She says, so what if they're planted? Because it matches real life. I'm just plugging in my cord here for the laptop. Actually, it is significant, because if you're going to distort a situation, even if it does reflect real life, it is still a distortion, because you're relying on actors. Now, Hollaback want the attention, and they have certainly achieved that. That in itself needs to be raised some questions. Let's be clear here. Hollaback's not a charity. It's not like a women's refuge, or it's not a charity. It's an ad agency. So that automatically should bring about some questions. Now, the man behind it is a guy called Rob Bliss. Apparently he's the producer. He said he got the idea when he saw his girlfriend getting street harassment. But he himself has acknowledged probably only 1% of men behave this way. And the author in the video, although he was sort of making excuses for it, excuses that I don't entirely agree with, he was saying, women want to be noticed and so on. I don't think any woman wants to have unwelcome attention. I think if a woman doesn't want it, you shouldn't do it. But anyway, Rob Bliss, who is a producer of the video, said himself probably only 1% of men do it. So in that case, why are you editing this down and distorting the situation? Look at the side effect of this. Already, this is dividing men and women. Many women are saying that men don't understand harassment. Many men are resenting the fact that we're all being tarred with one brush, and we are. Even if you say, oh, but it's not saying all the men are the same, actually, it is basically vilifying one gender. And I still think there's clear double standards here. If you had some sort of commercial or campaign that solely focused on women in a negative light, feminists would be the first to say, oh, look how sexist that is. But it seems to be completely okay to do it for men. So I think that's just unreasonable, and it's actually quite dangerous. And it just shows that feminist campaigns divide men and women. They divide men and women. They don't bring people together. What this commercial is doing is trying to make women in New York scared of all men. It certainly sends out that message that all men in New York are going to be sleazy. Never mind the thousands of men who didn't say anything. But there's another area I'm concerned about, and that is, where do you draw a line? Now, I've already pointed out that we do not know for an absolute fact that all of this was catcalling. So where do you draw the line? What if, this is going to get to a point where any sort of communication is going to be seen as some sort of harassment, or women are going to get to a point where they're so scared of men that any sort of communication would be dealt with suspicion. There's nothing wrong with people being cautious, I can understand that. But say a guy approached a woman to ask for the time, or ask for directions or something like that. The problem with these sort of videos is it is insinuating that even basic communication is problematic. They say it's catcalling, and I have no doubt that some of it is. I want to go on record and say that. I am not for a second saying that everything said in the video is appropriate. And I disagree with the author insofar as I don't think women should just have to put up with it. If they're uncomfortable, men shouldn't do it. And he acknowledged that some of them might lack class. But there is another dynamic to this, which is that men are expected to make the first move in terms of striking up a conversation with a woman. So where do you draw the line here? In this situation, it's a woman walking through the streets. But what if a man likes a woman, right? And he's expected to make the first move. What if it's in a bar? Are we now saying that if a man approaches a woman he doesn't know in a bar, that is harassment? Because he's interested in her, and maybe he has innocent intentions, he just wants to dance, he wants to buy her a drink, he just wants to strike up a conversation. Basically, is Hollaback saying that all men should act like monks? Because I do have concerns about where you draw a limit here, about where the line is. They seem to be saying that, I mean, the woman in the video says that, or one of the women in the comments says, he's a stranger, end of story. But my question for women who are coming up with something like that is, well, think of the men in your life. I'm not talking about family members, I'm talking about male friends. How did you meet them? Or your boyfriends, for that matter. How did you come across them? Are you telling me that you knew them your whole life? At some point your boyfriend would have approached you. So my question is, how are men supposed to know how to approach a woman without being accused of harassing her? And I acknowledge what some of the women were saying on that thread, that they have tried to tell the guys to shut up, or they've tried to say that it's inappropriate, or they've ignored the guys, and some of those guys have got nasty and they've been more confrontational. Now, that's why I'm saying I do acknowledge that there is inappropriate harassment out there, and guys that behave like that, they are jerks, they are lowlifes. If you're making a woman uncomfortable, there's nothing romantic about that, and there's no justification for it. So I am open-minded enough to see that there can be some problems with street communication in that way, and it certainly is harassment. So I get that. But what I cannot accept is the distortion of this video, and already it has done that. It has divided men and women. So already it's had a negative consequence. I can't see this video doing anything positive. They say it's about raising awareness. Well, all it's done is divide men and women. It's certainly not going to help women that have this problem. In case of sort of serious harassment, I don't see how it's going to help them. I mean, it says donate money. For what? Are they going to send that money to Women's Aid or something? Are they going to give information to the police? What exactly is the money going to do? So there's a lot of legitimate questions to be asked about this. In that sense, I do agree with the offer to say that that Hollaback is pathetic, insofar as they are showing, cherry picking 100 guys, some of whom are making communication that is dubious, others that are clear harassment, and others that we really don't know what the situation is. So, as a man, I feel offended that I'm being tarred with the same brush as some guys who have no class. And that unfortunately that's what it's doing, because there are women coming on the threads with these sort of discussions and say, oh, look at how all the men condone it and so on. And unfortunately that is going to have that effect. There are going to be men who condone it and make excuses for it. Just for the record, I don't agree necessarily that just because a woman dresses in a certain way, then she wants guys to holler at her and catcall. Men should have self-control. I see attractive women all the time. I don't feel the need to say something to her. So I disagree that, you know, as a man, you cannot control yourself. You know, you need to judge the situation, and if a woman looks uncomfortable, then don't do it. I do agree that some women definitely want the attention. There's no doubt about that, and I think if women are being honest with themselves, they would admit that. But that is still not an excuse to make someone feel uncomfortable. So, I'm trying to be open-minded about this. I'm trying to see both sides, but those are the problems I have. The distortion of the video in that it edits a minority of men in a city of 8 million people. The fact that it is an ad agency that's responsible for this, therefore they have an agenda. They clearly have an agenda. And thirdly, the double standards, because actually men do face other forms of harassment as well. Maybe not sexual harassment, but they would definitely, I mean, most street assaults, violent street assaults, are men that are the victims. Why is there no commercial talking about how men have to deal with drunks? Why is there no commercial talking about how men have to deal with idiots who want to fight them for no reason? I mean, I've had drunk guys starting me for no other reason than because they're idiots, because they want to fight, and as a man, I have to deal with that. Also, as men, we have to defend the women in our lives. That's a responsibility we have. Um, so there's a lot of dynamics to this that I don't think are being discussed. Let me know your thoughts. I'm still very skeptical of that video. I can understand them making an issue about harassment, but there's clear distortion going on there. And remember, it's an ad agency.